The woman known to history as Eva Braun, the longtime mistress and briefly the wife of Adolf Hitler, was born in the Bavarian city of Munich, Germany, on the 6th of February 1912. The second of three daughters, her parents christened her Eva Anna Paula Braun. Eva's father, Friedrich Braun, was a high school vocational teacher, and her mother, Franziska Kronberger, was a homemaker who, prior to her marriage, had worked for a textile firm as a seamstress. In 1908, Franziska gave birth to her eldest daughter, Ilse. In 1915, the Brauns welcomed their youngest daughter, Margareta, whom everyone called Gretl. The Brauns had a difficult family life, but Eva maintained fairly close ties with her parents and sisters throughout her adulthood, most particularly her younger sister Gretl. Eva's family faced challenges similar to many of their fellow Germans during the early 20th century, including the upheaval of the First World War and the accompanying economic hardships. Friedrich Braun enlisted voluntarily when war broke out in 1914, serving first in Serbia and then in a hospital in Würzburg until 1919. When he came home, Friedrich and Franziska's marriage promptly fell apart. Eva was just 6 years old when her father came home from the war, and she probably had little or no memory of him prior to his return. Like so many women during wartime, Franziska had coped alone with her three daughters during her husband's absence. The exact reasons for the Brauns' marital discord are unclear, but perhaps the couple's near-complete separation for almost the entirety of the war contributed to the decision to separate permanently. Perhaps Friedrich, like so many men who witnessed the horrors of modern warfare for the first time between 1914 and 1919, had suffered trauma which his marriage could not withstand. One recently published biography of Eva Braun claims that her father struggled with alcoholism, adding another dimension of pain to the picture of the Brauns' family life. Whatever the reasons, Friedrich and Franziska finalized their divorce in 1921. Interestingly, they renewed their marriage only a year later. Some historians believe that her parents reconciled for purely financial reasons. Maintaining just one household during the economically turbulent post-war period in Germany was challenging enough. After a year of trying to maintain two households, Friedrich and Franziska likely decided that they could only afford to support one, and they remarried in 1922. The marital difficulties of the Brauns apparently made their home life extremely tense and fraught. According to Eva's childhood friend, Herta Ostermeier, Eva spent as much time away from home as possible, presumably so she would not have to listen to her father and mother arguing. She apparently spent so much time at the Ostermeyer's house as a child that she even called Herta's parents mother and father. Like many other struggling German families, the Brauns' financial circumstances began to improve markedly by 1925, thanks to the infusions of American money flowing into Germany as a result of the Dawes Plan of 1924. Friedrich, Franziska and their daughters moved into a much nicer apartment and were even able to afford a car. Unfortunately, improvement in the family's material circumstances did not serve to improve the Brauns' marriage, and they evidently remained unhappy together. Notably, all three of their daughters effectively left home as soon as they reached the age of majority. Some of Eva's biographers note that she struggled with depression throughout her adolescence and into her early 20s, perhaps partly owing to her turbulent family life. Eva spent her childhood in Munich attending a local elementary school and later a Catholic lyceum in the city. She was a decent student, but an exceptionally strong athlete who loved any and all sports, which she continued to enjoy throughout her adulthood. In 1928, when she was 16, she left home to attend the Marienhoer Institute, a Catholic vocational school at Simbach am Inn. She spent 1 year at the institute, studying domestic arts and secretarial skills, including bookkeeping and typing. Eva received an education which was quite good for a girl from a lower middle-class German family at the time, an education designed to prepare her for marriage, but one that also gave her practical job training so that she could just as easily support herself. Secretarial skills were highly valuable in the young women's job market, and Eva was able to secure a position quite soon after graduation. In 1929, she responded to a newspaper advertisement for a shop assistant at the photo studio of Heinrich Hoffmann, the unofficial photographer and propaganda photojournalist for the Nazi Party. Eva worked behind the counter at the shop, selling postcards, photographs, and cameras, as well as managing the store accounts and inventory. Over time, Hoffmann also trained Eva in the skills and processes of professional photography, including how to operate all of the equipment and how to develop photographs. The career of a professional photographer was a rare and privileged one for a young woman in 1930s Germany, and Eva continued to work for Hoffmann as a photographer for the propaganda wing of the Nazi Party for the next decade and more. And it was in this niche that she continued to explore and develop her chief interests, including media, the fashion and beauty industries, cinema, and popular culture. It was not long after she first began working at Hoffmann's studio that Eva Braun first met Adolf Hitler. The exact date is unknown, but one of Eva's biographers recounted the following anecdote of their first meeting, although it should be noted that the sources for this historical account are not very well documented. Reportedly, sometime in October of 1929, when closing time was approaching, a tall, middle-aged man with a short, thin mustache walked into Heinrich Hoffmann's shop. Hoffmann introduced the visitor to Eva as Herr Wolf and asked her to run out and fetch some beer and sausages. Then all three sat down to eat while Hoffmann chatted companionably with the so-called Herr Wolf, who, throughout the meal, seemed unable to stop staring at Eva. When he rose to leave, he offered her a ride home in his Mercedes, which she politely declined. "Haven't you guessed who that gentleman is?" Eva's boss asked her as soon as their guest had departed. "No," she replied. "Don't you ever look at our photos?" Hoffmann asked incredulously. "It's Hitler, Adolf Hitler." Being a native of Munich, Eva of course knew all about the aggressively populist leader of the NSDAP, whose political power and reputation had only grown throughout the previous decade. Heinrich Hoffmann was not only Hitler's personal propaganda photojournalist, but a close family friend who remained part of the dictator's intimate inner circle to the end. Because so few personal letters or writings survive from either Adolf Hitler or Eva Braun that might shed light on the details of their relationship, her biographers have relied heavily on the post-war testimony and memoirs of those who survived the war, including Hoffmann's memoirs. According to Hoffmann, Hitler did not seem very interested in Eva initially, though Hoffmann claimed that Eva's regard for Hitler was obvious. One biographer speculated that the 17-year-old Eva, whose home life had long been difficult and unhappy, was attracted to the projected authority of a father figure, which Hitler may have represented for her. Perhaps it was his regional celebrity that impressed her. As inconceivable as it seems to most observers today, Eva may even have found him handsome, as indeed many women in 1930s Germany did. But Hitler may have been more interested in Eva than he was willing to admit to Hoffmann. Despite his chief photographer's later claims about Hitler's initial lack of interest in Eva, he was apparently interested enough to order a discreet investigation into Eva's background. As early as 1930, only months after meeting her, Hitler had privately asked his secretary, Martin Bormann, to investigate whether Eva's ancestry was fully Aryan, which it apparently was. Believing that a large part of his popularity stemmed from his decision to remain a bachelor, Hitler probably kept his feelings hidden, if he had any, for Hoffmann's young employee. Hoffmann's daughter, Henrietta, remembered Eva remarking that every time Hitler came into the studio after their first meeting, he seemed to have time for a chat with her. He sometimes brought her small gifts or offered to drive her home. Yet 2 more years would pass before the relationship became more serious. At the time of Hitler's first meeting with Eva Braun, he was living with his 21-year-old niece, Gretl Raubal, the daughter of his half-sister Angela. The nature of this relationship is still unclear, and some historians have characterized its dynamics as sexually codependent, if not overtly intimate. But whatever else it was, the relationship was certainly highly controlling and restrictive for Gretl. She had moved in with her uncle at the age of 17 to attend school in Munich and continued to live with Hitler for several more years after failing to complete her studies. She had a brief love affair with Hitler's chauffeur Emil Maris in 1927. Enraged, Hitler had fired Emil and dramatically restricted his niece's activities and freedoms. He kept her home, away from friends and visitors, and assigned a guard to accompany her anywhere she went. In the fall of 1931, when Hitler was away in Nuremberg, Gretl Raubal is believed to have committed suicide by shooting herself in the chest with Hitler's own Walther pistol. It was rumored that the two had quarreled over a young man from Linz in her native Austria that Gretl wanted to marry. Hitler had apparently forbidden the marriage, leaving his Munich apartment in a rage. Gretl's death was a major scandal for Hitler, and his political opponents did not waste the opportunity to suggest that an incestuous and abusive relationship had driven Hitler's niece to her death. It was even suggested he might have arranged her murder himself. Most historians, however, tend to reject this last suspicion. According to most accounts, Hitler was devastated by Gretl's death. He reportedly kept her room in his apartment just how she had left it, and kept portraits of her in all of his private residences until his own death. However, the observer should not ignore the reality that this highly publicized personal tragedy did much to win Hitler greater sympathy with his political supporters and help facilitate his rise to national power during the following year. Within weeks of his niece's passing, Hitler began to spend a good deal more time with Eva Braun. Because Eva worked for Hoffmann, Hitler's close friend, it was made easier for him to carry on an extremely discreet relationship with her. He took her out occasionally for a meal or a movie or to the opera, but more frequently, Eva's employment with Hoffmann made it possible for she and Hitler to meet more privately, either at the shop after hours or in Hoffmann's own home. According to multiple sources, including Hitler's housekeeper, by 1932, Eva was spending nights at his apartment whenever he was in Munich. Hitler was adamant that he should never marry or carry on a romantic relationship in the public eye. His public persona, carefully crafted over many years, was one of austerity and patriotic sacrifice. Hitler believed that German women supported him politically because they admired his supposed commitment to his people above all else. Additionally, a casual relationship with a young girl half his age was completely antithetical to the official Nazi ideology, which was both highly traditional and family-oriented. He was, therefore, resolved to keep his relationship with Eva Braun both informal and secret, believing that if he married, his female supporters would find him less attractive, and the German people would cease to view him as a lonely and lofty figure dedicated only to Germany. But Eva was evidently not satisfied with being Hitler's part-time secret girlfriend. She saw less and less of him during the summer and fall of 1932, when he was deeply engaged in campaigns for the chancellorship and the Nazi Party's election to a majority in the Reichstag. Some historians believe that Eva's disappointment at Hitler's continued absence and her dejection over what she perceived as his lukewarm regard for her led her to attempt suicide sometime during the autumn of 1932. While sources differ on the exact date and some of the minor details of this event, several witnesses and biographers believe that Eva's suicide attempt was a desperate cry for attention from Hitler. Eva shot herself in the chest with her father's pistol and then quickly contacted a certain Dr. Plater for emergency medical attention. Plater was Heinrich Hoffmann's doctor, and some scholars believe that Eva's decision to contact him first was strategic. According to this reasoning, Eva could just as easily have contacted Dr. Martin Marx for help, for whom her sister Ilse worked as a medical secretary. But Eva instead summoned a doctor, perhaps via Hoffmann himself, who would be guaranteed to promptly inform Hitler of what had happened. By the next day, Hitler had returned to Munich and was at Eva's bedside. Upon hearing from the doctor that she had purposely aimed for her heart, Hitler reportedly remarked to Hoffmann that he had not realized how much Eva loved him. Perhaps thinking of his niece Gretl, Hitler said that he was now resolved to take care of the poor child. Indeed, despite his assumption of national power in 1932, Hitler often spent less time in Berlin at the Reichschancellery in the ensuing years than he did in Munich or at the Berghof, his vacation retreat near Berchtesgaden on the Obersalzberg. Whenever he returned to Bavaria from Berlin, whether to Munich or to the Berghof, Eva joined him. She still continued to work at Heinrich Hoffmann's photo studio, but also became an unofficial party photographer herself, selling her photographs of Hitler and other party members to Hoffmann, who paid her extremely well for them, presumably at Hitler's request. Being known as Hoffmann's junior photographer helped Eva to remain close to Hitler in the most discreet fashion possible. Eva was now 21 years old and officially an adult, but she still technically lived with her parents, as most young unmarried German women tended to do. Throughout the years of Eva's relationship with Hitler, it seems to have been Heinrich Hoffmann who provided a wall of respectability around Eva. If she stayed out late, spent the night out, or left suddenly to spend a few days on the Obersalzberg, it may have been Hoffmann's province to reassure any concerned parties that Eva was merely working, accompanying party members as a photographer or secretary. In fact, she frequently did fulfill such roles during her travels with Hitler, especially in the early years of their relationship. Despite the significant amounts of time they spent together, they managed to keep their affair an almost total secret as far as the general public was concerned. They were publicly photographed together only once over more than a decade, at the Olympic Winter Games in February of 1936. In the photo, the two are not even sitting together, and Eva Braun can be seen seated in the row behind Hitler. Indeed, it seems only their family members and closest friends knew about Hitler's girlfriend. When rumors of Eva Braun's relationship with the Führer became known to the German public at the end of World War II, many did not believe them at first, so solid was the wall of silence which had been erected around her. According to multiple contemporary witnesses, even when they were surrounded by friends and family at the Berghof estate, relaxed and well out of the public eye, Hitler and Braun always scrupulously avoided even the slightest displays of affection toward one another. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, armaments minister, and member of the dictator's intimate inner circle, noted in his memoirs that Eva Braun had her own suite of rooms in each of Hitler's residences, including at the Berghof. Yet, he claimed, at the end of the evening's activities, Hitler and Braun would quietly withdraw to Hitler's rooms. The question of a sexual relationship between Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun has long been a matter of speculative curiosity for historians. Most scholars agree that there was an undeniable closeness and intimacy between Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, but the exact nature of this intimacy will likely never be known for sure. In light of the unparalleled horrors perpetrated by the Nazi regime, it is very difficult for most historical observers to imagine or explore the human facets of his or Eva Braun's lives. Although we understand that such aspects of life are important biographical details, it can be for many people extremely unsettling to confront the humanity in individuals who, because of their deeds and convictions, we can only see as monstrous and repugnant. Biographers and historians have speculated widely. Some imagine that the twisted and hate-filled Hitler must have had some unthinkable sexual proclivities, while others believe instead that he and Eva had a fairly conventional, albeit extremely discreet sexual relationship. One of Eva Braun's most recent biographers, however, claims to have uncovered previously unknown testimony and documentary evidence that the sexual relationship between herself and Hitler was mostly non-existent. According to this chain of evidence, Eva Braun was born with a reproductive condition called Mayer-Rokitansky syndrome, or MRKH, a rare condition which only occurs in approximately 1 out of every 5,000 women. If this is correct, it is quite possible that Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun had no sexual relationship, because many women who live with MRKH find sex extremely painful, depending on the particularities of their individual condition. Eva Braun is not alone as the subject of such deeply personal historical speculation. Numerous scholars have also claimed that Adolf Hitler was also born with one or more congenital reproductive conditions. Some historians believe that he had both an undescended testicle and a condition known as hypospadias, in which the urethra appears on the underside of the genitals rather than the tip. It is generally known that Hitler was utterly paranoid about being seen naked, and even refused to allow his private doctors to examine him unclothed. He disliked being touched unless he instigated it, and both he and Eva Braun shared an intense cleanliness fetish. Hitler pursued so few romantic relationships in his life, none of which can be fully confirmed. So it does seem possible that extreme self-consciousness about his body might have played a part in his determination to remain single. If it was indeed the case that Hitler and Braun had a virtually sexless relationship, it makes the seemingly long-standing bond between them even more interesting. Some might look upon the relationship as a mutual refuge from the sexual expectations that other potential partners might have had. Other scholars suggest that Hitler used Eva, her devotion, and her obvious love for him to project the appearance of an active and socially conventional sex life to members of his inner circle. We can speculate, but the full truth of the matter may never be known. As well as the potential physical health issues she may have suffered, Eva Braun also experienced mental health problems, including depression and suicidal ideation. Indeed, Eva attempted suicide a second time in 1935 by taking an overdose of sleeping pills. Historians and biographers have pointed to Hitler's non-committal treatment of Eva during the early years of their relationship to help explain why she might have made the second attempt. A fragmentary document purporting to be Eva Braun's diary, which she supposedly kept during the spring and summer of 1935, reveals that she saw very little of Hitler during these months, and that his lack of commitment to her seemed manifest. It is unclear whether this diary is indeed genuine, for scholars disagree about its authenticity. Eva's older sister, Ilse, examined the document many years later, and apparently believed the handwriting to be that of her sister's, but a few historians are still unconvinced. Hitler's distant manner with his girlfriend was remarked upon by others as well. In his memoirs, Albert Speer noted Hitler's treatment of Eva Braun during the early years of their relationship with distaste. Instead of extending to her the same refined Viennese manners he seemed to show toward other women of his acquaintance, he seemed dismissive and even disrespectful towards Eva. Speer observed that on one occasion Hitler did not even kiss her goodbye or take her hand. When she was departing the Berghof, he simply handed her an envelope which presumably was filled with money. After her second suicide attempt, which many historians tend to view as another bid for Hitler's attention, Eva seemed to advance even further in Hitler's favor. According to her alleged diary, Eva was relieved that she would soon no longer have to play the part of a shopgirl for Hitler was going to buy her a house in Munich. In 1935, at the age of 23, Eva officially moved out of her parents' house, and her sister, Gretl, moved in with her. Whatever the true nature of their relationship, it is clear that Eva Braun did come to play a central role in Hitler's life. Despite the fact that she was kept out of sight during most formal or diplomatic functions, she was soon established as the undisputed mistress of the house, even if only to people in the know. Much of the information about their relationship comes from letters, post-war testimony, and memoirs from Eva Braun's family and friends, as well as from Hitler's inner circle of military adjutants, secretaries, private doctors, and high-ranking Nazi officials. These individuals were those received most often by Hitler at the Reichschancellery in Berlin, and were also frequently invited to the more relaxed atmosphere of his Berghof estate. This so-called royal court around Hitler included Joseph and Magda Goebbels, Albert and Margarete Speer, Martin and Gerda Bormann, Heinrich and Erna Hoffmann, and their daughter Henrietta with her husband Baldur von Schirach. The combined documents and testimony from the members of Hitler's royal court reveal a highly narcissistic and insecure man at the very center of it all, a man who dominated every conversation with self-important rambling monologues, and one who could not bear to be challenged or contradicted on anything. Yet several of these witnesses report that by 1935, Eva Braun's position in Hitler's good graces appeared nearly unassailable. She was the only member of his inner circle who dared to remonstrate with him regularly about anything. She had begun, by all accounts, as a quiet, modest, and unassuming presence among Hitler's milieu in Munich and at the Berghof. But over time, she apparently gained confidence as her influence with Hitler grew. This should not suggest that she inserted herself into political or military discussions or attempted to advise or intervene in such matters. Virtually no account describes her doing such a thing, and multiple witnesses claim that she, in fact, had little interest in politics. She did seem, however, to be the only person in Hitler's life who could get away with interrupting him. She rolled her eyes at him when his long rants and diatribes bored her, or seized the initiative to direct the amusement of everyone assembled whenever she found the current activities tiresome. No other members of the royal court could have or would have dared to behave in such a way in Hitler's presence. In the early stages of World War II, when certain goods were being rationed or banned across Germany, Hitler instructed that a ban be placed on makeup and other beauty products. Eva Braun was apparently outraged and remonstrated with Hitler indignantly, after which the dictator amended his original ban to a simple halt on domestic manufacturing. Hitler refused to allow even his own sister Angela, Gailey's mother, to criticize his girlfriend. Angela, who had made no secret about her marked dislike for Eva Braun, distanced herself from her brother soon after Eva became a permanent fixture and de facto mistress of the house at the Berghof. She remained the only regular resident guest able to invite whomever she pleased to the estate, and the guests present usually included a number of her friends or family members, such as her sister Gretl Braun or her childhood friend Hertha Ostermeier and Hertha's husband and children. It is very likely that Eva's privileged position made some of the other members of Hitler's royal court dislike her as well. Various observers who survived the Second World War and the collapse of Nazi Germany described her in ways which varied widely. A few described her as lively and charming, a glamorous and gracious hostess, and utterly devoted to Hitler. Quite a few others described her more negatively, using adjectives like feather-brained, spoiled, and selfish. Albert Speer once observed that she seemed to be devoted only to pleasure, and remarked disdainfully that all members of Hitler's entourage were even required to kindly put up with her two awful little Scottish terrier dogs, Negus and Stasi. Another interesting adjective frequently used by members of Hitler's royal court to describe Eva is apolitical, and the use of this particular description, according to one biographer, is very telling. After all, what is the one burning question that students of history are likely most curious about when it comes to Eva Braun? The question is, did she know? Some historians have been quick to point out that neither Eva Braun nor any members of her family ever actually joined the Nazi Party. However, other scholars believe that it was Hitler's idea to make sure Eva Braun never joined the party. Members of his family, including his sister Angela, never joined the party either. It is possible that Eva never became a member because Hitler wanted to ensure her protection and anonymity as much as possible. Eva's father was the only member of her family to officially join the Nazi Party, and not until as late as 1938. However, one should hesitate to interpret these facts as a sign of reluctance to support Nazism, for there is some evidence to suggest that most members of the Braun family were content to see the Nazi Party's rise to power, as well as content to see Eva enjoy a close relationship with Hitler. Historians generally believe that Heinrich Hoffmann was chiefly involved in providing cover for the relationship between Braun and Hitler, but it is possible that such cover was not needed in the case of the Braun family. Considering the many nights and the more extended periods of time that Eva spent away from home between 1931 and 1935, it somewhat strains credulity to imagine that they did not know or suspect what was going on. Eva Braun did not move into her own residence until 1935, a residence that was purchased by Hoffmann but paid for by Hitler. Eva had worked for Heinrich Hoffmann, a self-advertised supporter of the Nazis, since she was 17, and less than 3 years after she commenced her employment, her younger sister Gretl Braun came to work in Hoffmann's photo house as well. Gretl Braun spent so much time with Eva in Hitler's inner circle, in fact, that she eventually married Hermann Fegelein, SS general and Himmler's liaison to the Führer in 1944. When they were interviewed by one of Eva's biographers, Nerin Gün, During the 1960s, the Braun family seemed not only to have downplayed their difficult family life, but her parents also claimed not to have known anything about the relationship between their daughter and the Nazi leader until many years later. They claimed only to have met him once, by chance, when they saw Hitler and Eva together in a Munich cafe. In light of the facts, however, these claims are rather unconvincing. Two of their daughters spent several years working for a prominent Nazi photographer. They spent years as part of Adolf Hitler's intimate social circle, and much of this took place in Munich, right under their noses. The claims of distance between Eva's family and the Nazi regime are weakened further by the knowledge that, as the city of Munich faced bombings and destruction toward the end of the war, Eva's parents and siblings were quick to flee to Hitler's Berghof estate for safety. One member of the Braun family, however, gives the distinct impression of an earnest attempt to distance herself from both the Nazi Party and Eva's relationship with Hitler. Eva's elder sister, Eva Braun. Ilse was the first to leave home at age 21. The same year that Eva went to work for Heinrich Hoffmann, Ilse went to work as a medical secretary for Dr. Martin Marx. Not only was she employed by Dr. Marx, but she lived with him for 8 years, from 1929 to 1937. It is unclear whether Ilse was simply given room and board in her employer's house, or if the two actually lived together in the romantic sense. But whatever the case, Ilse Braun flatly refused to quit her job despite her sister Eva's attempts to persuade her. Presumably, Eva's issue with Dr. Marx was that he was Jewish. While Eva and Gretl were becoming entrenched in Nazi social circles, their elder sister was quietly living and working with a Jewish doctor. Such a thing, in fact, became illegal following the establishment of the Nuremberg laws in 1935. No person of Aryan ancestry would be permitted to enter into any personal or professional relationship with a person of Jewish ancestry. Yet Ilse continued to work for Dr. Marx for a further 2 years, only leaving her job when it became clear that Dr. Marx was going to lose his license to practice medicine in Germany, as all German Jewish doctors eventually did. Dr. Marx emigrated to the United States in 1938. It was most likely Eva Braun's influence with Hitler that helped Ilse secure her next job, secretary to Albert Speer. Ilse, however, stayed in this position only 6 months. She went on to become a journalist. Unlike her younger sisters, her professional and personal life showed little inclination toward Nazism, which was something that her work colleagues noted about her as well. All this being said, it is highly likely that everyone involved with the Nazi regime, including Eva's family, knew more than they cared to admit later on, when the war was over. So the question still remains, did Eva Braun know about the Holocaust? 8 decades later, that question still remains definitively unanswered. To Westerners, Adolf Hitler is undeniably the most ubiquitously well-known, condemned and reviled figure of the 20th century. The dehumanization and genocide of millions of European Jews and other groups targeted by the Nazis are arguably among the most heinous crimes and greatest tragedies in world history. As one of the individuals closest to Adolf Hitler, naturally we wonder just how far her knowledge of the depravity of Hitler's regime extended. But importantly, how can we ignore the fact that the testimonies about Eva Braun come from some of the most prominent members of the Nazi regime? One must concede that after the war was over and the Allies had emerged victorious, these individuals had every reason to give testimony and write memoirs that downplayed their adherence to a hateful and racist ideology, as well as downplayed the extent of their participation in a sadistic and brutal regime, the painful legacy of which is still deeply felt today. Most members of Hitler's inner circle who survived the war insisted that Eva Braun was apolitical. Indeed, they insisted that Hitler, his adjutants and fellow party officials never even discussed policy or military matters in front of the women. This claim, notes one biographer, appears patently self-serving. If one can create the image of a don't ask, don't tell atmosphere within Hitler's inner circle, then the claim that they did not know the full extent of the regime's crimes until after the war becomes more believable. Although Hitler's hideous final solution was, admittedly, known to relatively few people during the war, some historians now reject the notion that those closest to Hitler, including Eva Braun, could have been kept fully in the dark about what was happening in the forced labor and death camps. Eva Braun and the rest of Hitler's inner circle were certainly well informed about Hitler's determination to eradicate all European Jews. Anti-Semitism was a concept which was fundamental to the party line of the NSDAP. Hitler outlined his poisonous rhetoric very clearly in Mein Kampf and reiterated precisely the same ideas in his last will and testament just hours before his suicide. All of these individuals were present for the 1935 convention in Nuremberg. They saw even more restrictive laws passed against German Jews, who had already been removed from civil service and public service jobs, had been subjected to a state-sponsored economic boycott, and to open persecution and violence in the streets. None of them raised their voices in protest when the civil rights of German Jews were revoked, when they were reduced to segregated communities, or subjected to inhumane treatment and conditions. And far from the image of a don't ask, don't tell atmosphere, some historians now suggest that the blurred lines between Hitler's public and private lives made such compartmentalization highly unlikely. The fact is, they insist, Hitler did not compartmentalize his public and private lives at all. Many of those he worked most closely with as Führer were also his close friends and their female counterparts, far from being sheltered from the realities of Hitler's regime, were in fact just as deeply committed to National Socialism and its rabidly anti-Semitic elements as Hitler and his high officials were. Magda Goebbels, Ilse Hess, Emmy Goering, these women were official card-carrying members of the Nazi Party since the early 1920s. Magda Goebbels, in fact, was such an influential public voice among female members of the Nazi Party that for many years she was viewed as the de facto First Lady of National Socialism since Hitler remained unmarried. Why would the husbands of these women, or Hitler himself, bother to work so hard to keep them ignorant of developments which they seemed always to have supported? Hitler's habit of governing events from afar, of issuing policy and military orders in the same environment in which he entertained his friends, most of whom were also his colleagues, brings the claims of his collaborators' lack of knowledge into serious question. We are left with the terrible and chilling notion that those closest to Hitler, including Eva Braun, may well have known the full extent of the crimes of the Nazi regime and found it possible to turn their faces coldly away from the inhumanity which they had helped to nourish. For indeed, their support for Hitler's authority may have been the overriding reason for their privileged positions in his intimate inner circle. Hitler was notoriously insecure and sensitive to criticism, and those closest to him tended to remain in his good graces if they never challenged or contradicted him. Heinrich Hoffmann's daughter Henriette von Schirach recounted an anecdote of just such an occasion in her memoirs. Reportedly, she and her husband Baldur, who had been named Reichsstatthalter and Gauleiter of Vienna, had remonstrated openly with Hitler while in company at the Berghof during the summer of 1943. Baldur had insisted that Hitler must end the war, which was going very badly for Germany, thanks to the heavy bombing of German cities by Allied planes. Henrietta also claimed to have further challenged Hitler by condemning the deportation of Jewish women in Holland, which she witnessed. Enraged, Hitler had apparently screamed back, "You are being sentimental. What do you care about Jewish women in Holland?" Despite the fact that she was the daughter of one of Hitler's closest and oldest friends, Henriette von Schirach and her husband were apparently never invited to the Berghof again following this confrontation. Again, many of these anecdotes must be treated with skepticism and with an eye to the motivations of their writers. Some historians have observed that Henrietta's memoirs, as well as the writings of Hoffmann, Goebbels and Speer, often show attempts at personal exoneration for participation in the crimes of the Nazi regime. But in addition, and more importantly, they reveal that Hitler valued sycophants above all others. What historians have referred to as the cult of the Führer strongly influenced Hitler's image for all of his supporters. Power and favors were given to those who demonstrated the kind of blind faith and absolute loyalty that he seemed to value above all other qualities. And if there is one thing about which all of these witnesses could later agree, it was that Eva Braun's commitment to Hitler to live only for him seemed complete and undeniable. Perhaps this was the reason why she seemed to hold the most privileged place in his life. Throughout the years of World War II, even as Hitler spent more extended time than ever away from Bavaria, and everywhere the privations and brutality of war became steadily more apparent, Eva Braun continued to live an absurdly privileged and luxurious lifestyle in Munich and at the Berghof. She continued to go on pleasure trips with her family and friends, skiing in the mountains or sunning herself in an Italian villa. In a period of rationing and bans on goods, she had access to a seemingly bottomless supply of champagne and fine food, to expensive designer clothing and jewelry, and tailor-made cigarettes. When lively discussions at the Berghof turned uneasy with references to ruined German cities and the Soviets advancing inexorably from the east, Eva would be the first to brightly suggest an outdoor picnic and a swim at nearby Lake Koenigsee, or a fun, if mildly undignified, parlor game. Ironically, Eva Braun, the unofficial First Lady of Nazi socialism, was the very antithesis of the party's official conception of the ideal woman. Far from being the plain, traditional, thrifty matron of virtuous domesticity, Eva Braun was fashionable and cosmopolitan. She was not at all domestic. She wore makeup and bleached her hair. But one biographer has suggested that it was precisely this kind of behavior that may have motivated Hitler to continue projecting confidence in a future victory. Goebbels, who was perhaps just as blindly loyal to Hitler, wrote admiringly of Eva Braun's determination to live as if nothing would change, and praised what he viewed as her efforts to keep Hitler's spirits high. As little as Eva Braun conformed to the National Socialist ideas of womanhood, a further ironic and interesting point is that neither did Hitler adhere to the image of virtue he had cultivated for himself as the Führer, or live by the virtues he extolled to the German people. He saw himself as bohemian and intellectual, appreciating art, architecture, music, theatre, opera, and philosophy. Yet his regime persecuted artists and muzzled intellectuals who refused to conform to party lines. He sometimes seemed as committed to pleasure as Eva was, and officials like Himmler bemoaned the difficulty involved in getting him to respond to communications or make prompt decisions. Hitler's habit of governing from afar, whenever he felt like it, seems striking coming from a person who demanded hard work, conscientiousness, and sacrifice from the German people. Additionally, Hitler's ideology strongly stressed the virtues of marriage and many children, both of which he assiduously avoided while keeping his socially unconventional girlfriend a secret. What we are left with is a vision of hypocrisy, of power, decadence, and privilege purchased at the cost of unthinkable crimes. But there is reason to believe that Eva Braun herself wanted both marriage and children. Very few of her writings survive, but examination of the many surviving photos and home movies she recorded give the observer an impression of deep and wistful yearning. Eva often filmed and photographed Hitler with children, usually the children of visiting guests. It is true that she sold many of these pictures to Heinrich Hoffmann as they were useful in projecting a nurturing and fatherly image of the Führer in Nazi propaganda. But it is also known that Eva preserved many of these images for herself in a personal album. These photographs and home movies hint at Eva Braun's sadness that she and Hitler, for whatever reason, could not marry or have a family. 1943 saw Hitler's longest absence from Bavaria yet. During the campaign on the Eastern Front, Hitler spent most of his time at his command center in Poland, monitoring the invasion of Russia. Yet Eva Braun was still enjoying the good life in Bavaria. She even went on her annual vacation trip to Italy that year. While he was away in Poland, Hitler reportedly telephoned Eva every night around 10 o'clock. By the summer of 1944, the chances of victory for Germany had begun to seem increasingly remote. Henrietta von Schirach recalled advising Eva that when Germany's defeat finally came, she should go into hiding. Eva had apparently responded, "Do you think I would let him die alone? I will stay with him until the last moment. No one can stop me." Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun had both made their wills and planned a double suicide as early as 1944 should Germany's defeat prove inevitable. These plans were made following the attempted assassination of Hitler on the 20th of July. He had provided financial support for Eva in his previous will, but his last will and testament referred directly to Eva's enduring loyalty and friendship. It was for these reasons, he claimed, that he had finally decided to marry her before they ended their lives together. Indeed, when Hitler retreated into the Führerbunker beneath the garden of the Reichschancellery, Eva Braun resolutely joined him there, traveling from Bavaria to Berlin, even though the Russians would overrun the city within days. Eva Braun spent the last few days of her life underground with Hitler and a select few members of his inner circle. Mentally, Hitler himself continued to unravel as the end approached. He alternated between bouts of rage at all of the traitors who were now turning their backs on him and desperate delusions that he might possibly find the means to launch one last grand counterattack that might forestall defeat. Eva, however, behaved much as she had always done. She dressed and groomed herself to please Hitler and tried to raise his spirits however she could. When the mood of the company in the bunker grew morose, she handed out champagne, put some music on the record player, and suggested that those assembled should dance and enjoy themselves. In the early morning hours of the 29th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married in the bunker with Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann as witnesses. The short wedding was followed by a brief champagne breakfast with those still remaining in the bunker. The following day, on the afternoon of the 30th of April, Hitler and Braun said goodbye to their companions and retired to the privacy of Hitler's study. Some witnesses reported hearing a gunshot from within. When they entered the study, they found Eva Braun slumped over a sofa. She had bitten into a cyanide capsule. Hitler had tested the poison for efficacy just 2 days before on his own pet dog Blondie. Hitler had bitten into a cyanide capsule as well, and then shot himself in the head with his own pistol. According to Hitler's wishes, their bodies were taken out of the bunker into the garden behind the Reichschancellery, doused in gasoline, and burned. The Soviets were able to identify their bodies using dental records, and the remains of both Hitler and Braun were buried near Magdeburg. Some decades later, their remains are believed to have been re-exhumed by the Russians, cremated once more, and the ashes scattered in the Elbe River. Biographies of Eva Braun are scarce compared to the numerous volumes that have been written about Adolf Hitler, who remains one of the most infamous figures in world history. In fact, Eva Braun continues to be a rather shadowy historical figure, which is surprising considering the degree of her closeness to Hitler himself. Perhaps it was because he took such pains to cloak the relationship in silence. Additionally, all of Hitler's and Braun's documents were destroyed, according to their wishes, after their deaths, with a few exceptions. Before saying goodbye to her sister Gretl, Eva had given her collection of photographs, home movies, and apparently a collection of letters that she and Hitler had written to one another over the years. Heavily pregnant and trying to get to safety after her husband, SS General Hermann Fegelein, was executed for desertion, Gretl entrusted the cache of documents to a man who appeared to be a fellow German refugee, but who was, in fact, an American agent. Eva Braun's photographs and home movies now reside in the American National Archives in Washington, D.C. However, when the collection was received, no letters were found among the documents. This chain of events is both disappointing and very interesting to historians. The fact that Eva Braun was willing to allow these documents to remain intact, seemingly in defiance of Hitler's wishes, might indicate that she wished their contents to become known. Because the rumored letters were never found, we cannot imagine what it was she may have wanted others to know. But perhaps it was that she ultimately demonstrated with her life and the manner of her death that she loved Hitler and that her loyalty to him was complete. Perhaps she wanted to make sure the world knew that he had cared for her too, that she had been important to him after so many years living in anonymity. Some scholars can find it in their hearts to pity her, a young, impressionable girl who wasted herself, her life, and her love as the anonymous companion of a monster. Others are not so willing to empathize and can only revile her as the worst sort of collaborator, a blindly faithful sycophant who probably understood fully the unthinkable price of the luxury and privilege in which she lived. Despite the completion of multiple biographies about her, few of them have added significantly about what was already known about Eva Braun. She remains stubbornly and fundamentally unknowable, since few other sources besides her photographs and homemade films remain. These offer us a silent and haunting window into her world, a world of glamour and privilege that stands in sickening contrast to the brutality perpetrated by those closest to her and, at the very least, tolerated by her. The smiling faces of those in the foreground of her pictures seems to be set against an invisible backdrop in which the silhouettes of countless murdered millions stand mute, waiting expectantly for justice. What do you think of Eva Braun? Was she an innocent young girl with little interest in politics, or someone who knowingly benefited from the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime? Please let us know in the comment section. And as always, thank you very much for watching.